You're in your startup drafts, you're maneuvering through the first several rounds, you start to see your lineup screen populate. Let's talk about guys who, at their current cost to me, are incredible values in Dynasty in these mid to late rounds, starting with Daniel Jones. I look at the prevailing mood and sentiment. We're in a bit of a value dip, just piling on the lack of momentum last year, well, due to an ACL injury, a major lower body injury. So there's the uncertainty surrounding that, just the idea that the Giants are this terrible team, not really favorable, highly thought of in any way, shape, or form. But Daniel Jones, I feel, is just being a scapegoat. This is a guy that, keeping in mind, finished as a top 12 fantasy quarterback in 2022. And for all of the struggles of last year, he still demonstrated he's capable of being the QB1 in a given week. There's a lot of assumption that the Giants are just going to draft their quarterback of the future in 2025 after, the J.J. McCarthy smoke, rumors, Drake May trade up, rumors of this past draft. Well, he survived that. And if we're thinking about just the overall strength of what the next 2025 quarterback class projects to be, it's just not as strong. There is no one nearly as talented as Caleb or a Drake May, at least up to this point through really their second year in college. Of course, there's the possibility of risers, a Jaden Daniels-esque rise, maybe a Bo Nix, Michael Penix surprise veteran guy that gets a first-round draft capital. I'm not going and doing all that mental calculus right now and assuming that it would be the Giants that just so happened to select that guy. There's a lot of equating right now, a lot of assumptions, and you know what happens when you assume. For me, I am looking at what Daniel Jones has shown us on the football field, and in the 11th, 12th round of startups, where you're not even counting on him to be a starter, there's just too much positive that I see in terms of the trajectory of Daniel Jones to be the week one starter, which he's already gone out and said, dating back to a couple weeks ago in minicamp reports, asked, do you have any physical limitations? Do you have any doubts about your ability once you're cleared as far as planting your foot in the ground, quote unquote, physical limitations? No, don't have any doubt about it. I can do all that stuff now, and I'll be even better in a month. He's not wearing a brace. Dynasty, of course, is not an isolation one-year game. But at a certain point, you have to be where your feet are. And our feet are with Daniel Jones getting an opportunity in 2024 to prove again, to show why he was worthy of a contract investment that he did get, potentially buy himself even another year as a potential high-end QB2 on your Dynasty team in your Superflex spot, even if he does stink it up, so to speak, devil's advocate here. The replacement is seemingly inbound. What's the relative risk compared to this price that you paid in a startup? Keeping up with the Joneses here, it's Aaron Jones as another guy in that 11th to 12th round range that I just like the value too much. It makes too much sense. Yes, he's old, full of mold, so to speak, 30 years old, often injured. That's the name of the game for many players. And in Dynasty, I'm not just going to assume injury. Whatever seems likely at some point or another, a week or two here or there. What I am paying attention to, what I am emphasizing, focusing on, is the opportunity to clear fantasy relevance once again. That is certainly worth a swing. I don't want to necessarily bank on a mystery box of a Kendre Miller or a Zach Moss in their respective situations. Of course, Dynasty is a game of projection, but it's also a game of fantasy points. And once you get past the first dozen or so, and you have an Aaron Jones and the upside that he presents on a Minnesota Vikings team that clearly knows the type of player, the talent that he is, goes out and gives him a one-year deal, $7 million, with little to no competition. Ty Chandler, no disrespect. He's a nice handcuff, but Aaron Jones is bound to get quite a role. Call it recency bias. I call it looking at what Aaron Jones is still capable of, throwing out the washed nomenclature out there. You look at once he returned from an injury to close out this past year, 13 for 53, 4.08 yards per carry, nothing great. Did get 4 targets though. Then 21 carries for 127, 20 carries for 120, 22 carries, 21 carries, 18 carries, consistently 6, 5, 5.6, 6 yards per carry, 5, 1, 1, 6 targets. The guy is still capable of handling a workload. A guy positioned to be a meaningful contributor to your team for 2024 at a dynasty price that is so low that it's well worth the quote-unquote risk here. That's the theme with these players. I don't see incredible degrees of risk. I do see some reward, and especially with a Sam Darnold or a JJ McCarthy, whoever's under center there. I know Kevin O'Connell rather, is going to have the confidence to give the ball, to screen some targets for an Aaron Jones. Even if it's just this year, it's quite a price to get a guy that has top 15 fringe low-end RB1 production potential. Transitioning to the rookie portion of this video, at running back, it's Audric Estime in the 15th. Day 3 capital for a guy that has day 1 opportunity potentially. Javonte Williams is being speculated to not even being a lock to make the team by people that are actually following the team relatively closely. Got Jaleel McLaughlin, who we know from last year, a little bit of a burst onto the scene guy, a Blake Watson, another guy out of Memphis, who I've been mentioning as a guy to watch, a priority ad at this time of year, to be that quote-unquote joker role, as Sean Payton defines it, in that offense. Effectively an Alvin Kamara, that receiving upside, if you want to think of it that way, the fantasy target appeal. But even if it's not the target appeal, Audric Estime has been spelled out by Sean Payton as a guy who he envisions being an early down, first, second down back. I don't want to pass up, throw aside that relevance in the 15th round of your startup drafts. This is an example where you have to be able to overlook the narratives that we talked about with this class of, oh my gosh, it's not nearly as stacked as it was last year. There's no one worthy of the first round pick. Arguments about even second round. Obviously, Jonathan Brooks ends up going in the second round. You need to throw aside the narratives of a draft class. And now we're on to actual, in isolation, the situations, the opportunity curves potentially for these players on their specific teams that they find themselves in. Just because you were drafted at a certain relative arbitrary line in the mid 100s doesn't mean your team views you that way, nor does it mean the team is going to ascribe that label as a barrier to your potential relevance. You've got the Broncos saying they viewed him more highly than a mid-day 3 guy. And when you think about who's going to be under center, Bo Nix, who I like Bo Nix. He's a relatively decent value, I think, himself. That's another conversation. But with a rookie quarterback, you know you're going to see a healthy ground game to support a Bo Nix, to make his life easier, to open up a quick game, a play-action game. Audric Estime maybe not being the recipient of that the play-action game in terms of targets, but he's a guy that can absolutely set the tone on early downs and eat up some carries for you to be potentially a startable flex play, or maybe even higher. When we look at even a year from now, maybe it even takes a couple weeks into the year, and then you have an incredible sell-high window. Audric Estime, really love his value currently in Dynasty startups, as I do for Tyrone Tracy, going back to the Giants. Already talked about him a little bit with Daniel Jones conversation. Going in the 17th round effectively, another day 3 player who has possibly day 1 opportunity and relevancy, albeit opposed to the early first, second down work more as the receiving work compared to an Audric Estime. You've got a Devin Singletary there who there is the incumbent advantage with a Brian Daboll. They know each other from Buffalo, but Tyrone Tracy already getting some praise from a Brian Daboll, a guy who is a converted wide receiver at Purdue. Love the receiving upside with him. Really good athlete, 9.78 RAS score. Battling with a Singletary who, yes, he got a 3-year deal, but I would not be surprised if in the mid-season you've got Devin Singletary being potentially outsnapped by a Tyrone Tracy. I just see that possibility. And he's already reportedly spent time with the first team in minicamp. It's Malik Neighbors in that offense as the preeminent weapon, especially now you've got no Saquon Barkley. And then who? Tyrone Tracy, I think, has a very, very good chance to be a significant target earner in that backfield. Am I saying he's going to all of a sudden turn into this top 15 RB in Dynasty? No. Keeping in mind, a 17th round pick in your startups, you're swinging for upside. And it is just too much to possibly turn down for the easy reward that's very realistic. Transitioning to wide receiver, it's Michael Wilson in your 14th, 15th, 16th rounds. A guy that has a easy, clear path to wide receiver 2 on an ascending offense with a more than fantasy supportive quarterback in Kyler Murray. You've got, of course, Marvin Harrison, the guy that's been projected there, penciled him in. He's there, who's already been drawing rave reviews himself. But so is Michael Wilson from the aforementioned quarterback Kyler Murray, from his head coach Jonathan Gannon. And ultimately, wide receiver 2 is not a bad thing whatsoever when you think about the attention that a Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to draw. You can't throw every ball to Marv, as awesome as he's going to be. You've got Jonathan Gannon even saying as much. Some weeks, Michael Wilson, he'll get 10 targets. Other weeks, 3. So volatility, variance, of course, it's going to be there, especially for these guys in these mid-late rounds. Otherwise, you'd see them consistently being in your 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th rounds of your startup drafts. That's the case everybody's dealing with. You just have to follow the noise at a certain degree. Maybe it's just reacting too much to the hype. But the hype, what is it to this current cost? I'm going for upside. I'm beating a drum here. You search for upside. You capture on one 10-target week or two. All of a sudden, that's value. That's a tangible second-round pick potentially, or whatever the asset is, that is much more significant than this 14th, 16th round price tag you paid in a startup draft to be your what? Wide receiver 5, 6, 7? You don't have to hold these players forever. That's another thing you have to keep in mind. In the context, though, of a Dynasty startup draft, I want to identify guys who their trajectories, it's just too favorable, such that you've got an opportunity to turn late round garbage into mid Dynasty year, off season, whenever the opportunity arises, into some gold. Last but not least, it's another MW at receiver. It's Mike Williams in this same 15th, 16th round conversation. A guy that, similar to Aaron Jones, oh my gosh, 30 years old, give or take, out of touch, out of really attraction as this Dynasty asset at the receiver position, often injured. Oh, he's washed. The Chargers release him. They cut ties with him. It's all reality. That's valid to point things out like that. But you got to be careful to what degree you get emotional or narrative connected to a player and your evaluation when it comes time to these upside play opportunities in these rounds. Yeah, he's past his prime, but when the guy was healthy on the field just this last year, he produced at a top 10, a wide receiver 10 overall points per game. Yes, you heard that right. And is the opportunity maybe a little bit less given Garrett Wilson's there? Of course it is. Sure. I'm not expecting a wide receiver 1 type production, to be very clear, but at the very least, similar to Michael Wilson, what he's dealing with a Marvin Harrison Jr. ahead of him, all of a sudden there is certainly going to be meaningful targets just begging for someone like a Mike Williams to absorb in that offense. Realistically, I can see a fringe top 24, a fringe wide receiver 2, more likely a wide receiver 3 type production. This rate, it's a no-brainer. The bottom line with Mike Williams is when he's healthy, throw him into your lineup, and all of a sudden you could be the recipient of a guy that wins you a week or two over the course of the season. That is very, very attractive value for me at the 15th, 16th round. What's ultimately lost in the draft steal, this conversation, this discussion overall, is the inevitability of life after your startup draft. The beauty is you don't have to conform to a win now by all costs. I'm totally blowing it up, rebuilding right this second. Don't get me wrong, you have to have a overall strategy, a plan. You have to have some direction, of course. But by going for value, searching for upside in your startups, you're giving yourself some flexibility, some versatility to allow things to play out, to allow potential momentum to build. Potential camp reports, maybe a good preseason game or two, maybe a good week 1 or week 2, and then boom, all of a sudden, you get value that's too good to pass up relative to what you paid. Let me know what you guys think of these steals I've identified. Let me know yours in the comments relative to these mid-late rounds. Have a great one. I will see you in the next one. Peace.